Good afternoon. I stood up way too tall in my chair. Now I'm like, my head is out of frame. There we go. Yeah, much better. Now I'm shorter. All right. This is the way to
Well,
start a podcast.
that's our podcast. And well, thanks for joining us. What are we talking about? I think that's a little bit of a question. What do we label this? Because as we brought it up on Sunday, and the whole group gasped, and some of it just because they don't know what we're going to do about what we're doing with this, and so.
Yeah, well, there was almost a sense of, oh, please. Like, please don't. I mean, you could feel like I'm sure there's people who lean into that and are like, oh, let's go. But it felt more like it was exhaustion. Like, really, I mean, this is a place that I get to go and not think about partisan things. And are you going to do that to us, really?
Yes. Which is interesting. And because I thought about what to talk about today a little bit. And so let me say a little bit in summary of what we talked about last time that weaves into this whole thing is one of the things he's talking about is, because we're kind of going through the introduction still, is that typically Christians and churches will go to one of two extremes. They will either be hyper partisan, or they will be private and not. And so either the churches will be very much all about politics, or they'll be like our church, generally speaking, is we don't talk about politics.
Yeah.
And right. And so they're like, oh, I don't want that divisive, angry thing being brought into this relatively peaceful church. And that's not what we're doing here. That's not what the book is trying to do. He seems to be saying, how do we have a conversation about how the church talks, reacts, responds to a hyper partisan, hyper politicized world.
Yeah.
Don't you think that's saying?
Yeah. Oh, I do think so. I was just thinking about, as you were describing, I think our church is relatively peaceful, when it comes to that. But I do recall, like the 2016 election, there was a lot of tension in our church at that time. It was a different church. I mean, it was like literally, we were a different church. And is that right? Yeah, because 2017 is when we changed to Open Door. But I just remember, yeah.
Oh, yes. Now I do remember. Yes, there was.
Yeah, there was a lot of tension. I mean, I was an elder, and there was a lot of tension on the elder board related to partisan topics. And then I remember. I mean, I remember maybe 5 or 6 months ago having an interaction with somebody at church where they introduced a political topic, and I basically said I'd rather not talk about politics at church, and they never came back. And I'm kind of okay with that.
Yeah, it's. I get. And when you first talked about it, I briefly was confusing our reactions and to between the 16 and the 20. Which,
oh, sure.
Right. And like, okay, yeah, it wasn't that partisan then. That's because a lot of the people who wanted us to be hyper partisan had already left.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. And so we had kind of come to a place as a church of going, we're just not talking about this stuff. Right. And I know that within our church, there are some people who are very strong right and and a few people who are very clearly left.
Yeah.
They don't want to talk about it, which, is and that's one of the things that I heard from our congregation afterwards. Who was talking about it. It's like I don't like talking about this stuff. It's stressful and everybody gets angry and like, yeah, but they also said, but it is a good thing if we can figure out how to do this. It would be a good thing.
Yeah, yeah, and to model for people, I don't. Again, we're not really into the specific topic yet, but I appreciate the chat we're having, because I don't want there to be a litmus test, a political litmus test related to our church, where somebody comes there and we basically are, here's the way you have to believe, here's what your political stance needs to be in order to comfortably attend church here. And likewise, I don't want the church to be subject to a litmus test when somebody comes in and says, if this church doesn't fall in line with this particular partisan stance,
Right.
progressive, conservative, doesn't matter. I think that, and we'll get to this when we get into chapter 1, but the idea that you ascribe to certain beliefs and assume that Jesus agrees with you, then you are creating a Jesus in your own image. As our friend Ross King wrote, God's like me, anyway.
Right. And the only thing I would, and this is something I would correct what you said because of what we've already said. We don't want a political litmus test. No. We should change that word to a partisan litmus test.
Yes. Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah. But see, that's what we do, because we just assume those two words are interchangeable, which they're not. But I use the same language. So.
Well, so yeah, I think that's part of what we want to do is to reframe. And that's a lot of what chapter 1 talks about, is reframing certain words. And we'll get to chapter 1. We're still kind of working our way through the introduction, but it's sometimes necessary in all things related to Bible study to set your assumptions aside and then review things with an open mind with a correct context. And you will often find that the assumptions that you've made based on teachings you've received from people who had assumptions already based on things they received, we've received a watered down and or inaccurate reading, let's say, of certain scriptures in the Bible. And by refreshing that, going back to the context and the initial intent, oh gosh, that opens up a new understanding.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe at this point, let me see if I've been thinking about how to summarize some of the things he's saying in the introduction. There is one more comment. I'll bring that up when I feel like it fits. It seems like to me that what he's trying to say is there are three basic truths that he's going to hang everything else on. One is that all authority is God's authority, particularly government. And so there's a sense in which we are meant to be submissive to authority, governmental authority.
Yeah.
Romans 13. There's, we are not revolutionaries. We don't want to make a coup. When the government, we should need to follow the government. But the second piece of that is just the general point, which he doesn't explicitly says this point, but there's an assumption that's behind it, is that we need to remember that everything's corrupted, that no government, no culture is entirely right, that it doesn't matter how much you love your particular culture, a particular political stance, party, all of them have things about it that are not going to be what God wants, all of them. Therefore, there's always a call to also be subversive, because nothing is going to be the way God really wants it to be. I think those are two of the two basic ones. Would you agree?
Yeah, and there's a underlying tension between those two,
which produces a tension.
Yeah,
right. We're meant to be subversive and submissive. We are meant to be, and how do you know when to be which? And that's not always easy. And then that brings us to kind of the third one is he's talking about, we need to, and I think chapter 1, you've read it more recently than I have, is that the gospel is a political statement. Political meaning, because I just corrected it a moment ago, political meaning, politics in the classic sense is about how we are meant to organize, how do we structure, how do we relate to each other as a group for human thriving. Just generally, how do we, well,
Right.
of course the Bible has a lot to say about that. Of course the gospel has a lot to say about that stuff. It doesn't have a lot to say it has implication for partisan politics, but it's not about partisan politics.
Right. It speaks very much about, again, the organization of people and really the nature of Jesus and how he was disruptive to the existing organization of people and the leadership. And that's,
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so you put it all together. On one hand, we're required to be obedient to governments, but also subvert them because we're in obedience to the true authority, God. It also means that we, on one hand, are political, but we're not partisan. We're meant to be public, not apathetic, or abstained from speaking truth into a culture, I think, but not taking the sides of Jesus over with that. Well, because I'm trying to form it, taking sides with Jesus in that he's our ultimate allegiance, not a country, not a party.
Right. Yeah, and that's really kind of what the first part of chapter 1 talks about. Is it's breaking down some words that we use and associate with being a Christian in today's world: gospel, believe, and kingdom. Those three words. And when we talk about faith, which we align with believe, he talks about that it's about devotion as much as it is a leap of understanding or belief. So you the idea that you believe also that the connotation carries with it that you are devoted to Christ, you are faithful to him.
Yeah, faithful, like a house. That kind of a devoted, or I'm prioritizing this relationship over every other relationship in my life.
Yeah.
Brings me to the line that I was. Yeah, I explained some of this, and his pushback was, be called partisan no matter what. And I said, well, that may be true, but I don't have an answer to that. It's like, yeah, I think people want to put us in boxes, is my thought.
Sure. Yeah.
It's easy to put someone when we encounter somebody who's not who doesn't fit in one of our boxes, we force them in one of our boxes because we need to figure out how to categorize a person or where they stand on something.
Sure. We are, I think, innately uncomfortable when people don't fit into the organization or the constructs that we believe exist. Am I breaking up?
Yes.
Okay, so are you. So
you're pausing.
Okay. I show that I haven't dropped any frames and I've got a good connection. However, there may be some instability, and I hope that it's not confusing or losing intelligibility, or as people are following along. Are you able to follow along?
Yes, there was just a couple of moments where I was talking. It was like, is he thinking and waiting for me to respond, or is he stuck? I couldn't tell.
I'll keep moving.
Dropping. So yes, I think so. That was the other comment. Is like, we're gonna be called partisan anyhow. Well, maybe, but I guess that's one of the questions to address as we go along. How do we combat being put in a box?
Well, and how do we avoid allowing that possibility to inhibit our action when we need to act, and also to prevent us from acting in response to inappropriately in a response to that. And I had a conversation with somebody recently about a very similar topic where somebody was they were reading the reviews for their business, and they saw like some comments that were like, oh, well, gosh, I maybe I need to do something about this. And part of the conversation was, well, do you? If you're going around trying to meet people's expectations or to please people, there's always going to be certain people that you're never going to convince or you're never going to make happy. And I think that the desire to placate people can get in the way of speaking truth. And, oh, there's somebody behind you. Letting the dog in.
That's my bad. I was grabbing a box.
Yeah.
You're doing a podcast.
Yeah.
It's good to see you.
Doing a podcast. Okay.
Anyway, but you hear what I'm saying.
I know. I had a little bit of an aha moment when you were saying that.
Mm-hmm.
They were reading comments that were left online regarding them.
Mm-hmm.
We inflate the significance of online relationships and online connections. It doesn't matter as well. I mean, if you're not a public person, it doesn't matter what someone thinks about you online. Not much. Meaning, just leave that as the private quiet. It's because I guess what I'm thinking about is who's going to call me partisan privately that I won't have the ability to change that perspective.
Right.
You see, if it was in one-on-one interaction with someone who's right or left in my life, I have the ability to have that by acting clearly different and consistently so, and explaining my position that's going to force them to not put me in a box.
Yeah, well, there's definitely, and I definitely resonate with that. I mean, for me, I want enough of a relationship with somebody who has an opinion about me, an opinion that I care about, right? That I can be known to them and they allow me to be known to them and vice versa. So, but what you're talking about is the boundary that you need to kind of create between who you allow to, how you're allowing yourself to be influenced by people in some of these partisan conversations. If I can bring it kind of more specifically to this. I had a great conversation with Deb Yeager probably a year and a half ago about a very partisan topic where she was unhappy with something that was going on at work related to somebody that I have a personal relationship with, which she didn't know. And she brought into it some assumptions, and she gave me permission in our conversation to change her mind by explaining my relationship with this person and my perspective. And she was very, her humility was wonderful in that she's like, thank you for explaining that to me. I'm convicted of jumping to, and she might be listening, so I love you, Deb, but jumping to a conclusion based on maybe some preconceived ideas. But I have a relationship with her, and we got to talk about it, and we both kind of came into it with, well, let me explain my perspective a little bit, and both being open to hear that.
And that's how we need to be.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, she loves that person at this point. Thinks they do an amazing job.
Yeah.
Right. And she that was a learning moment for her, a kind of a archetypical, a paradigm moment to go, this is how it needs to go on a whole host of things. So yeah, so I understand the concerns. I think we've laid out a little bit of a direction that we're going to go in this book, that he's going in this book, of, subvert yet being submissive. How do we do those two things? It's political, but it's not partisan, and figuring out how to navigate those three basic things as we go and deal with it in a year. Well, we always need it, but this year is particularly critical. And I don't know. I did get a lot of encouragement. I got the only other comment was, "That's awful bold of you, Brian."
Yeah.
It's needed. We need it, but that's awful bold of you. I'm like, yeah, but it's needed.
Yeah. Well, and I'm super hopeful that people take the time. We're intentionally trying not to make these episodes long, so that they're, let's call it bite size. Because, I'm reading through the book at the, you've already read it, but I'm just kind of going through it. So I can't really get very far ahead. You'll hear me responding to what I read earlier in the week or that day even. And, so you're going to get my response to that. And hopefully you can take some of that. And there's enough of curiosity that you might engage with the book as well. And I haven't got through the book enough to say, wow, man, we should all be reading this. I do trust you that.
I read it first.
Yeah, right.
Is this really good? Because there's another one I read and I go, no.
Good.
Not that, okay. No.
Yeah.
So.
Not that you shouldn't read books that you don't necessarily think you'll agree with. I think sometimes that's helpful.
Oh.
I remember my father-in-law giving me a book to read that said, "Oh, you'd really enjoy this." And I remember reading it and going, "Oh, what is this? This is..." but it helped me.
It is good to expose yourself to ideas you don't agree with. Absolutely.
Yeah, and to understand why you don't agree with them. I mean, like watching news or reading a column about somebody who's got an opposing viewpoint, you can get closer to that person and at least understand the justification behind that. And you can disagree and not be in opposition. Yeah,
and we have to model that. And it's not easy in this circumstance because, and I know we got to wrap up. Like, I think one of my things that I've thought about is, why are we in this circumstance? And one of the three reasons, I won't say the other two, but one of them is we don't know how to talk to each other very well. We don't know how to deal with conflict. We don't know how to politely disagree. Those kind of people skills are lacking.
Yeah.
And so the other one is, well, I'll tell you a second one. I'll leave the third one. The second one is we're so hyper emotional, especially on these topics.
I think if to restate that, we are primed to be triggered. We're very sensitive and we're ready to move.
Right. Yeah. Which causes for people to think clearly.
And it makes me think of how you've preached on God is patient, right? That he takes a beat or centuries or thousands of years, whatever, and chooses not to act, and that he's modeled that for us. And I can't, and you know this about me, I can't tell you how many times that I have started to write a response to something that infuriated me on Facebook and then deleted it an hour later before I ever posted it.
Yeah, it happened this week for me too. I wrote it all up and then boom. God, it wasn't politics. It was a religious thing. I thought, no, it's not worth it. All right. Well, thank you for joining us. Please, again, if you guys have questions, if you have concerns, things that we need to address or whatever it is, put it in the comments, and we'll because we want to interact, of course, with all of you guys on these topics. So, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, folks. Take care.